I'm going to start working on the horizontal stab elevators and the fin and rudder now. You can see from the plans it's an open structure. I'm going to modify that a little bit. Somewhere in the plans, or it's in the article, it talks about the bracing wires for the stab and for the fin are mandatory. I want to try to get away from that. I'll still have some bracing wires, but it's going to be for show only. So one of the changes I'm going to make is, instead of making this an open structure, I'm going to sheet the top and the bottom of the horizontal stab and the fin. I'll still leave the elevators and the rudder open and just covered with fabric. But for the stab and the fin, I'm going to sheet it, and that will give it a whole lot of strength. The stab is about 3/8 of an inch thick. 3/8 of an inch is about 10 mm. So I'm going to use 2 mm sheeting on the top and the bottom. So 2 and 2, that leaves about 6 mm for the internal part. I do have some 3 mm sheet, and that's nice and light and straight. So I am gluing that up. That's what's up underneath these plywood cauls here and the weights. I have 2 sheets of 3 mm being glued up, and I'll use that to cut the internal structure. In order to avoid having to join 2 pieces of sheeting widthwise to accommodate the wide center section, I cut each half of the center section separately and then join them later. I went back and measured this length, and it ends up, the horizontal stab here ends up being only about 3/16 of an inch too long in cord. If you cut that in half, that's about 3/32 of an inch, which is this little tick mark here. Not a whole lot. So I think span wise, I'm going to go ahead and build this for the plan, and then just maybe sand down a little bit to fit. The tips, I'm going to have to take off 5/16 of an inch. So I've gone ahead and whited out that part on both sides, so I don't get confused by it. Because I am going to sheet it, I'm going to split the leading edge in half. I'm going to have a sub-leading edge and then the real leading edge, because just like building the wing, I think that's much easier to shape the leading edge than it is to try to have sheeting go all the way out to the end and then sand a round over with all that glue joint. That's pretty tough for me to do. The designer has the tip block, if you will, go all the way up to the leading edge. So then you would have this little joint right here, which you would have to try to round over, and that's pretty tough to do. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make the leading edge go all the way to the tip, trailing edge all the way to the tip, and then so now the joint is on the tip side, and that's easier to sand. And even better, if you want, you could add a little piece of 1/32 balsa or 1/64 ply or what have you to cover up the joints here completely. Alright, so elevator, I'm not going to change it all. That does bring me to, apparently there is no mention, I haven't read the article about this, but there's no joiner shown for both elevator halves. I like redundancy in my elevators just like I like it in the ailerons. So I'm gonna have 2 servos, one for each elevator, and I'll have the G10 control horns. I won't use these. These look like nylon horns. I won't use that. I'll use G10. I'm gonna use 2 Robart hinge points per elevator. Plan has these diagonals, and that's great if you're going to have an open structure like this that just has covering, plastic film or what have you. But since I'm going to sheet both sides, that makes these diagonals a little bit superfluous. So I'm going to omit them, and I might actually break even on the weight that I gain with the sheeting minus the diagonal weight. I built this half of the elevator, and I got into automatic build mode, and I wasn't thinking that on this particular plane the elevator tapers down to the trailing edge. It's not a complete flat plate like some airplanes or some models are. So I'm going to try to salvage this one, but before I do, I'm going to build this one, and I'm going to do this one a little bit differently. To try to get a sharp trailing edge, first thing I'm going to do is glue up some 1.5 mm balsa to some 1/64 ply. And then I'm going to glue on another 1.5 on top of that. So this is the sandwich, and I have it propped up with some more 1.5 mm underneath. Now I have it this 1.5 here, have it away, so hopefully it doesn't get glued down in place. The issue is going to be that at the end, so here's our horizontal stab, here's the elevator. This right here is about 4 mm, and 4 mm is going to be the top and the bottom sheeting. So this right here is basically going to be sanded away to almost nothing. So the 1/64 ply there is to try to help maintain its shape. I know it's kind of a convoluted way to do this. What I could have done is just made a whole 1/64 sheet and then glued the balsa top and bottom and had that 1/64 in the middle. But that's an awful lot of expensive 1/64 sheeting, and to be honest, I'd probably want to cut away everything that's in the middle here. So that's a lot of waste. So this way, all I have to do is just have one 1/64 piece of ply here. I don't need it anywhere else. And it saves me a lot of the expensive plywood. And by propping it up with this 1.5 mm balsa, the middle, the 1/64 ply now is just about in the middle of the rest of the structure. So when I sand it, it should all be relatively symmetrical. So they didn't get glued, that's good. So now I have the 1/64 ply, and it's pretty much centered on the other pieces. Unfortunately, it's going to be a little bit fragile. I might want to go in and put some gussets in here to give a little more strength. So I glued in a few gussets from some scrap pieces that I had, just enough to try to give this a little bit more support. Let me sand it and see how it's going to work. So I applied masking tape to about half the leading edge. I'll end up trimming this part off and making it the leading edge, and this becomes the sub-leading edge. I sanded just to that edge right there, and then I'll end up sheeting both sides and then reattaching a larger leading edge and sand it all together. Got a very, very sharp trailing edge. The balsa's all the way down to the plywood here. Looks fairly good. I think it's going to work. It's quite fragile right now, but with the sheeting it should make it a lot better. Now to salvage this one, what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut the trailing edge in half, and then I'm going to build up a lamination of 1.5 mm balsa, ply, balsa, attach it, sand it all down, just like the other side. As with the horizontal stab, a couple of things I'm going to change with the fin since I'm going to sheet it. I'm not going to use any of the diagonals. The plan calls for a 1-inch wide by 1/4 inch thick tail post, runs all the way down to the bottom. I'm going to cut that in half and make it a 1/2 inch, and I'm just going to fill in like I did before and then sheet it. I'm not going to quite use planned dimensions. Basically what I'm trying to use up is my leftover sticks that I cut. Since it's going to be sheeted, I'm not too concerned about the if it's not quite the full dimension of the plan. The full size has these internal ribs, and the plan doesn't really match up with the way their location. As a matter of fact, the fuselage is a little bit off as well. That's probably why. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use the same thickness ribs as the outside, the perimeter, here, here, and here. And then the inner diagonals, I'm going to make them a little bit smaller, or maybe make them the same size and then kind of gouge out a little bit in the middle so that you don't really see these through the covering. As I was getting ready to sheet the fin, I discovered a couple of things. One was the fin and rudder are actually thinner than the horizontal stab. Horizontal stab is 3/8 of an inch, but the fin and rudder are 1/4 of an inch. And I thought that was kind of odd. So I looked at the pictures that I have, and I really couldn't tell from the pictures, but I have a cutaway, I guess you'd call it a cutaway view. And sure enough, the horizontal stab has a larger diameter steel tube framing in the leading edge and the trailing edge than the fin and rudder. The fin and rudder, they have the same diameter tubing at their joint that the horizontal stab has, but their leading edge and their trailing edge is about, I don't know, maybe half that size based on this cutaway. So I wasn't really sure where I wanted to go with that. I like the idea of having the quarter thick fin and rudder because I like that visual interest that it gives being a little bit smaller than the horizontal stab and elevator. But I know that if I did that, I would have to go with the bracing wires. No way around that. I mean, even the rudder with its cross bracing is still pretty flexible. So I didn't I'm really trying to avoid that bracing, for functional bracing, I should say. So I think what I'm going to do is I have some 2mm sheets glued up and ready to go on. I'm going to sheet this, but I'm going to leave this unsheeted. In the next update, we dig out the fuselage plans and get started on it.